Hi friends, this is Tina and welcome to my new video. So today we are setting up my new bullet journal for the second half of this year, and I'm so excited to show you this new setup and show you what notebook I chose. I always use 2 notebooks in a year because my 6 months always perfectly fits one notebook, so that is why I'm setting up my new bullet journal in the middle of the year. But let's look at the notebook that I chose for the second half of 2022. So Mellow is a French small business, and they create these beautiful watercolor notebooks that work perfectly for bullet journaling because of their 160 GSM dotted paper. And they are an absolute hidden gem in this bullet journaling community because they work perfectly with paints, especially because of the textured paper. If you'd like to get one of these notebooks, you can always use my discount code TINA10 for 10% off, while I also get a small commission. But now we are starting with the actual setup. The first page is the page that you can write your name on, so I did just that. I did a little sketch beforehand because I can't do absolutely anything without a good sketch. So after I did that, I went to the next page, which is always my cover page. I also just skipped the page that came straight after because that is usually always glued and it doesn't open fully, so it's a little awkward to do anything in that, so I just went to the next spread. So first I looked at the sketch that I did beforehand and just defined some of the little lines and just looked at everything and made sure everything looked good. But then I started actually making the header for this spread, and I just lettered 2022 in the left side of this page. For this whole setup, I basically used 2 fonts. The first one is the simple black lettered serif font, and the other one is a cursive. I used the serif font here when I made the numbers, and I think that looked good with the more simple and delicate illustration that I painted on later. I used my Tombow Fudenosuke hard tip pen to first make the outlines for the letters, and then I used a brush pen to color them in, but later on I just used the same pen for all of the steps. I also just thickened some of the thinner areas in the numbers because it just looked a little bit unbalanced, so I just tweaked them a lot, and then I started working on the actual painting itself. So I had a really big struggle with coming up with my setup theme. I have done flowers for my initial bullet journal setups for a long time now, and I've used watercolor as well, but I just couldn't really figure out what kind of flowers I would like to include in it or what kind of style I wanted to go with. I had so many ideas, I have so many pages of sketches in my sketchbook, but in the end I decided to go with daisies and forget-me-nots. And the reason why I decided these flowers out of all of them is that they are currently blooming where I live, and I've also been just admiring them on my walks, so that has inspired me to paint these flowers. I also just took a photo outside with some forget-me-nots, and I instantly added that as my lock screen on my phone, so that has been inspiring me throughout the days. So I was using Van Gogh watercolors when I was painting this, and I was using the brush that comes with the set, and that's the only brush that I use for all of these flowers. It has like a perfect sharp tip, so it's easy to work on smaller and bigger details as well. So what I was doing with the flowers, I painted a base layer first for the forget-me-nots, and when the base layer was still a little bit wet, I used a darker blue color and just tapped it to the center of the petals or the root of the petals and just let the color kind of blend to the lighter color. And that works well with this journal, but if you have a normal journal without watercolor paper, that might not work as well. It also just sometimes looked a little bit blotchy, but that was totally fine. I wasn't going for a perfect look anyways. And for the daisies that I did before the forget-me-nots, I just took a light gray color and just added it on top of the petals. It might not look like much, but I am adding this background color later, so it will definitely pop out. And now I'm working on the leaves and the stems of the flowers. I'm also adding the center of the forget-me-not flowers later, but I am just working on the stems first. And for the forget-me-nots, I made a thicker stem, and for the daisies, I made a little thinner one. But I just really like how it looks that there are all of these leaves and stems just in this painting. I think it makes it look a lot more interesting and full, so it's not like there's a lot of empty spaces in between. And for all of the greenery, I just mixed some green watercolor with some yellow and maybe some brown and black to create different shades of green to make all those little stems and leaves in this painting. At this point, I started noticing how much this whole painting just reminds me of one of those old vintage botanical books that has a lot of flowers. I loved that. So yeah, I definitely think this next step took that even further. So like I said, I made a little background for this painting and I just mixed in some gouache. So I took my white gouache and took olive green and yellow, and then I also mixed some fir green to make this pale minty green color for the background. I always try to get the same kind of shade when I was working on these pages, so I made a little swatch from the color that I was using in my notebook, so I could always just swatch next to it to see if the colors are matching. So yeah, I made this little circle shape behind the flowers, and this was really a tedious job to paint all around those flowers. You could definitely do this the other way around by doing the background first and adding the flowers with gouache later, but this just was the better option for me. For the gouache, I used a really tiny detail brush. First, I tried to use a bigger one, but I just noticed that I wasn't able to get that really precise results at all. But yeah, after I was done with the gouache, I went over the stems with watercolor again because some of them had gotten a little bit of the gouache on top and they just didn't look as sharp anymore. But that is it for my cover page painting. If you have watched some of my other bullet journal setup videos, I like to use the same kind of technique with my lettering and headers, where I have black lettering and then I will use my white Gelly Roll pen to make these white outlines for the letters and numbers. And I did it here as well, but I feel like my pen was kind of starting to run out of ink, so I constantly had to swatch it on my hand or on a paper to get the ink flowing again, but it didn't really work out how I wanted anyway. In some pages where this happened, I just took my white gouache and made the edges a little bit sharper, but here I just left it as is. But then I started working on my key page next to the cover page. Key page is one of those pages that I think could be really useful for bullet journal beginners, but for me it's not really useful anymore. I just like to include it because it just looks nice next to the cover page, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't really think it serves any purpose for me. I know all my keys and all my symbols that I use to mark my tasks and events with, but I just really like still including it in my setups. So I use the same font to write key on top of the page, and then I also use the same green gouache to make this frame for the actual contents of this key page. So I just marked my keys on the left side and then I wrote the names of them on the right side. This whole page turned out to be really minimalistic, and that's kind of where my inspiration for the rest of this whole setup came from. I wasn't initially planning on trying to make this as minimalistic, but I really liked the look, so I went with it. And here's to show that there is absolutely no bleed through in this page and there's hardly any wrinkling either, so this notebook definitely performed well as always. But next we are working on my future log. This is one of my absolute favorite pages to do in my bullet journal setup, so let's get into it. So if you have watched my other setup videos, you know that I've been using this same layout for many times in a row now. It's just a way that works for me. So what I did was I taped these columns and then I painted on them, and they will be kind of a backdrop for my headers for each month, and I will write the headers on top later and then I will add the mini calendars underneath that. So I will have one spread for the whole year's future log. I know some people like to use 2 different spreads or even more, but I pretty much just write birthdays on my future log, so I don't need any more space. I also use my future log as almost like a year at a glance page as well. I know some people like do separate spreads for those, but I don't feel the need to do that. I don't think I would like to spend that much time doing the small calendars in my setup, so this works fine for me and it's easy for me to visualize the calendars in this way. But for the painting, I'm doing pretty much the same thing as I did with my cover page, of course, just changing the composition of the flowers and the painting. So yeah, I'm just including the forget-me-nots and daisies, as well as the green leaves. So I did a full-on sketch beforehand just to make sure that I have enough things happening in these paintings. For some areas I added some forget-me-nots, and for some I added daisies, and then I maybe added some stems in the middle and just tried to make it look like there is a lot of things happening and still it doesn't look way too full. So this was a little bit of a tedious sketch to make, but I think it really made a difference. I think if I would have gone just straight with the painting part, I could have maybe messed this up or made it look either too full of elements or just added way too many empty white areas. I was struggling with editing this video just a tiny bit because I had so much footage. For some reason this setup took a long time for me to make, especially the parts where I painted the background with gouache. That definitely took a long time. I had to, be really precise and just do a lot of layers and make sure everything looks perfect. So that definitely took a long time. And that's why I decided to cut some parts out of this video, especially when I was just repeating my steps over and over again with the flowers and things like that. And I really hope that doesn't bother you. If you are thinking about recreating this yourself and you're kind of bummed out about me cutting some things out, I would highly recommend always just looking at the main things that you want to include in your setup if you are inspired by other people. But maybe if you can, try to come up with your compositions yourself. I think that is, at least for me, that is always a fun part about creating, because if you are trying to copy someone or someone's work to the T, that could really become a little bit exhausting and it could definitely drain your own creativity. At least I feel that. If you don't, that is a different story. But yeah, just if you are thinking about recreating this, I would highly recommend just not fully just like staring at this image and trying to recreate it, but rather just going with the flow and creating something of your own as well. But yeah, even if the gouache background took a little bit of time, I kind of still enjoyed the therapeutic way of doing it. It was in some weird ways kind of fun. And I believe that's the same reason why I think that is fun as why I like creating small calendars sometimes, because for some reason I love making small calendars in my future logs. I don't think I would like to do more of them than I'm already doing, but I still kind of like the process, especially when I don't do any mistakes, and I actually didn't do anything here. But before we are doing the mini calendars, we are first making the headers for this spread. And we are just writing the headers of each month on top of the painting that we just did. I know this might be a little bit of a nerve-wracking part. I was definitely a little bit scared that I would just ruin everything, but I luckily didn't. You can definitely do a sketch beforehand, like I think I did as well. I used my Pigma Micron in size 04 and I wrote the months with this cursive font. I think it just worked better with this style of spread that I did here instead of the serif font. But next I started working on the mini calendars, and what I think the trick to not making mistakes in here is that you have to look at a calendar that's on your phone, etc., and just look at the months and sketch some of the numbers on the calendar beforehand. I usually always go with the first date of the week and the last one, and then if I do a mistake along the way, I can easily notice it when I get to the last number of the week. I've also heard that some people are struggling with the fact that they are making a mistake in the first months and then the mistake is just continuing on the later calendars because they are kind of referring back to those earlier months when they are creating the later calendars. And I always try to not do that because I always look at each calendar as an individual calendar on my phone. It's easier to not continue a mistake throughout the whole setup or the whole page if you do that. I don't really know if this makes any kind of sense. I feel like sometimes I'm the worst person to explain anything, but yeah, just look at each calendar as individuals and also sketch some dates on the calendar beforehand. So then when you are starting to go with a black pen or something, you don't just mess everything up. But when I was done with my mini calendars, I decided to outline the letters again. And I used the white Gelly Roll pen before, but it just didn't really work and the headers didn't pop from the page. So I just decided to use white gouache. It definitely took longer to do, but at least I think the headers are visible now. That is it for my future log, and next we will set up my goals page. I also decided to include my notes section on the left page as well because I don't need a full spread for goals. Even though I love the setup that I did in my previous bullet journal, I actually did not really use my goals page at all. I had goals that I wanted to list there and I wanted to write there something, but I just didn't. I feel like sometimes the way things start for me kind of show how it's gonna go. So when I didn't use it for the first couple of weeks when the year started, I just didn't really go back to it. It just felt really weird writing my goals at the middle of me using the journal, so I just decided that maybe I would just wait for my new bullet journal, but that's a really bad way of thinking. So I really hope I can have the motivation to use my notebook a little bit more this time. This just sometimes happens and it's totally fine though. As you can see, I made my little notes header on the left side, and I also just decorated that little section of the page with a couple of forget-me-not flowers. It's a really simple look, but I still wanted to include something in this page. Also, I want to say that if you are in a situation where you really don't have that much time to set up your new bullet journal, but you still want to make it pretty and maybe paint on it, you can definitely just take some elements that I'm creating to make a beautiful setup just for you. I spent hours and hours on the setup. I think I had like 6 hours of cut footage when I kind of already had done some editing to my video. So I think I spent, I don't know, like 15 hours making this setup, which is really a long time. And I doubt that many people would have that type of time to set up just the first pages in their bullet journal. So I just want you to know that making a setup like this isn't like an easy and quick thing. I don't want it to seem like it, even though I'm obviously speeding things up a lot in these videos and just maybe making it look a little bit more easy than it is, but it definitely takes a lot of time. But like I said, you can simplify it however you want. You don't have to add the backgrounds to any of the paintings. You can just take like one flower and just repeat it over and over again, or you can just use your marker to just make a couple of little scribbly doodly flowers if that's what you need. Like I said, I went with a super minimalistic style for my layouts this time. I usually always go with boxes whenever I have like a section or like a question I want to focus on, but this time I just wrote the questions with my Muji Gel Pen, and for some of the sections I added a couple of circles below that, and for some I used this gray brush pen to add these little lines. I'm just definitely experimenting with this more minimalistic style. It again was not anything I tried to do in the first place, but it was definitely fun. By the way, if you are wondering what products I use to create this theme, I will always have them linked down in the description. If there's anything missing, please write me a comment or a DM on Instagram and I will try to get back to you really soon and just update everything. But next we are setting up a really fun spread in this setup. It's kind of like an interactive spread in some way. So it will have my grid spacing guide and also a little swatch page for all of my pens. So I took this vellum paper and cut out a piece that is basically the size of the page that is in my notebook. And this is for the grid spacing guide. I just rounded the corners of this piece of paper and then I just started making the little guides for my grid spacing on top. And because this paper is pretty much plastic instead of paper, I had to use a permanent marker. It's not the prettiest look, but I just had to use something that would stick to the paper. So first I just numbered all of the dots in the vertical and horizontal row. Then I also drew some of the dots on the upper left side of this page. And of course, if you didn't realize, this is see-through, so I can see all of the dots that are below, so it's really easy for me to work on. And I just divided the page in half and in thirds and fourths. Normally, I always add this page straight to my journal. I don't have it on a separate page, let alone a vellum paper, but I really like the idea of using vellum paper as my grid spacing guide because it is see-through and I can just easily put this on top of the page that I'm working on and see how many dots a box needs to be if I want to add 3 of them next to each other and have that symmetrical. I'm not sure if I've seen someone do the exact thing before. I think I might have, but I'm not sure who did it. But I want to just give credit to Bujo for treats and Art and Foxes. When this idea came to my mind, those are the 2 people that came to my mind immediately. I'm pretty sure they both have done something similar at least, so I will link both of them down in the description. After I was done with the initial guide, I wrote grid spacing on the bottom right corner of the page. And because I had to use a permanent marker, the ink wasn't really that black, so I used some gouache to put on top of that. But because the paper is not actual paper, it is plastic, it started to kind of break out from the page. Yeah, it's not the best look, but I cannot really undo it anymore, so we have to live with that. But to make sure that the paper actually stays on the page, I decided to cut out these little pockets or pieces of paper that I can glue on the edges of the page. I also painted them with the same green gouache and just glued them onto the page. I should have used stronger glue. I used a glue tape roller and I already noticed that one of the edges started kind of peeling a little bit, so I added that later, but I definitely should have done that from the get-go. But this is a fun little page. I really like how it turned out and yeah, I cannot wait to use it. I think it will be really useful in my planning sessions. But next we are working on my swatch page. This is a page that I got the idea from Not Just Corner. I really hope I said her name right. I will again link her Instagram account in the description. I saw this post from her earlier, maybe a couple of months ago even, and it was just an amazing idea, so I wanted to try it out as well. I always find myself watching my pens over and over again when I'm creating a new theme because I want to know if any of the pens that I already own fits with the theme that I'm working on, and I just don't have all of the swatches in one place. So this is a great page for just that. So in this page there is an envelope. Of course, as you can see, I'm painting a little flower thingy behind it, but then I'm making an envelope on top and then I'm putting these swatch papers inside the envelope. And on each little paper, I will be swatching different types of pens and watercolor and things like that. I won't be going too far into it in this video. I will just quickly show you what I'm doing, but I won't be talking about the pens or the things that I am actually swatching. I think that would be an idea for another video, but also this is not my idea, so I don't want to make a video out of it. Whenever I'm creating an envelope in my setup, I always measure a lot of things. What I did first when I was doing my first envelopes, I actually took apart an actual envelope that I already owned. And that was just a really helpful guide that I already had at home. So I just took it apart and looked at all the measurements and saw how the little pieces of paper were folded to get the envelopes. So I would highly suggest that you would do the same thing if you are a little bit confused about how to create one. It's going to be really hard for me to explain, so I think this is better. I made the envelope and I just glued it in. And I also drew these white edges to the envelope. And then I started to make these little swatch papers and I rounded all of the corners. I always designated one side of the paper to a set of pens. So for example, for one of them I swatched some acrylographs, and for some I swatched some Faber-Castell brush pens, etc. It was really fun to go through all of my pens and stationery products. If you want to do a page like this, of course, remember to credit the actual artist who came up with this maybe first, I don't know. So this is not my idea again. But you can always watch anything you feel like, maybe washi tape or some gouache colors or whatever you have at home and you feel like could be helpful to have in this kind of page. And another thing that is really cool about this whole spread actually is that both of these pages are ones that you don't have to completely redo when you are moving into another journal, because you can just take the grid spacing guide if you are using the same kind of journal, and you can also take these swatch cards and just put them in your new journal when you are starting a new one. So I think that is pretty cool. I'm always up for things like this where I can spare some time. But that is it for the spread, and now we will get to the next one, which is my YouTube planner and tracker. So I reserved a whole spread for this. I have to say again, I did not really use this spread that much in my previous setup. I wish I would have. I kind of sometimes did just glance at it and maybe add a couple of video ideas, but it wasn't really a super useful spread to me. I mean, I think it would be a useful spread, I just wasn't in the mood for this. But I am doing actually the same thing as I did that time, so I'm not sure if this is a good idea. But yeah, I just made my YouTube header on the left side, and then I made this row of small calendars on the right side. And I explained this in my last new bullet journal setup that I did, but it is basically a place for me to plan my content ahead on YouTube. I can just, you know, write a video idea for each week that I want to post, and I can see the calendars really easily. I can visually understand it. Sometimes I'm having a hard time just visualizing individual calendars, or if each calendar is in a different space, but I can understand things better when they are in the same format as, for example, in my iPhone calendar. So I wanted to do something similar, and I think it's really easy for me to understand. I just hope I will use it a little bit more this time. I also made the first day of each month a little bit different in color, so I can always easily see when the month is changing. But I did pretty much the same thing as I did in my goals page, so I drew the flowers again behind my header. I also really liked using the green gouache that I used in my cover page as a background, as a color for my frame for the whole page. I think it's such a small little thing, but it just works so well, so I did it here as well. And I also added a couple of little sections for the left side of the page. I think I forgot to record that one, but I just added some video ideas and notes and things like that. But now we are getting to the last spread in this whole setup. It feels like a long journey to get here, but I'm happy we are finally here. So for my last pages in this whole setup, I added my period tracker and also a little quote page, or the word of the year page, whatever you want to call that. I already did a word of the year page in my last setup, but I just wanted to do another one for the second half. So if you are menstruating, I would highly suggest having some sort of a period tracker in your bullet journal if you use one. I think it will be highly useful for you if you want to maybe track some of your symptoms, or just see that everything is going normally, or if there's some changes, things like that. I would always highly recommend using at least some sort of way of tracking your periods. But I made that page really simple. I did not add any decorations other than the little line that is below the header. And for the next page, I made a super cute illustration. I made something really similar as in my cover page, but I decided to turn the circle into a heart. And I think that was such a cute idea, so I'm proud of myself for coming up with that. I again just tried to add a lot of elements and flowers and leaves and just make it look really nice without having too much of that white space in between. By the way, if you like this setup that I'm creating right now, I will be linking some of my other new bullet journal setups down in the description. Definitely go check those out if you like this one. It feels so weird thinking that it's already half a year from my last bullet journal setup that I did here on YouTube. That is such a long time, and it literally feels like yesterday, and I think I will be saying the same thing for a long time. Time is moving so fast and it's kind of scary, honestly. So for the word I chose to write here, I chose softness. It definitely has the same vibe as kindness, and I kind of wanted to continue that because I think the most important thing that we can do each year to ourselves is be kind to each other and be kind to ourselves. And it is okay to be soft. And in fact, I think the world would be a better place for everyone if we handled each other with softness and kindness. But yeah, I'm really happy with how this page turned out. It's actually so cute. It's, by the way, completely off-centered. I don't know how that happened, but I don't really care. I don't really think that matters too much. But we are soon getting to the end of this video. I really hope you like this setup. I know it's a little bit different from my usual style and definitely much more minimalistic than usually, so I appreciate you watching this video and I would love to hear what you think about this new setup. Again, don't forget to check out Mellow Days and use my code DINA10 if you want to get one of their notebooks or anything else with a 10% off discount code. But now we are quickly going to flip through all the pages that I made in this video. I really hope you liked this video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Leave a thumbs up and maybe leave your favorite page you saw me set up in this video down in the comments if you are still here. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye bye!